Does anybody need more time? All right, so I'm gonna pause this and stop the share for a second. So, okay, so I just want to check in with people. What did you notice between those two experiments?
What I think is, if we rather write multitasking and in the next task write down the numbers next to each letter, that would have been much faster.
Hmm. So you're saying what was like the difference in times between your two scores?
First one was 4 seconds, second one was 34 seconds.
Yeah. Wow, 4 seconds. That's quick.
The first one, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
Yes.
Go ahead.
During the multitasking task, I wrote letters where I was supposed to be writing numbers sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, even when I was explaining it, I couldn't like letter number. I see Ariana saying it took pretty much double time because you're switching. So that's the thing with multitasking, is that you pay a cost every time you switch tasks. Your brain has to like do something funky every time you're switching. Yeah. So every time that you switch a task, your brain is using a lot of energy to like suck you from one thing to the other. So multitasking is a terrible thing for our attention spans. The more that we multitask, the more quickly our attention span is going to get burnt out. So let me go back to the screen share. Hang on one second. This one. And wait, nope. That's what I want. Okay. Okay, so then the second thing is distractions. I mean, multitasking is basically an intentional distraction. I guess the distraction that I'm talking about, I want to differentiate are things that are unintentional. For example, if you use email and you allow notifications in your email, every time you see a notification come up, that is going to distract you. It's going to pull your attention away from whatever it is that you're doing. It requires your brain to like switch gears, and then you have to switch it back to bring it back to whatever you're doing. That switching is what requires the mental energy and attention span that's going to burn us out more quickly than if we just stay focused on one specific thing. Another important thing to think about is relying on willpower to do something. So if we feel like we have to force ourselves to do something, and it's not something that we necessarily intrinsically want to do, which is related to the next point around extrinsic motivation, the more we feel like we have to force ourselves to do something, the more energy it's going to require for us to do that. The more attention energy, let's call it, or attention span is going to require for us to do that thing. And then extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. If you feel like you're naturally drawn to do something, it's going to be much less tiresome for you to do it. Whereas if you feel like you're being forced to do something, or you're doing it for some sort of an external thing, it's going to be much less interesting. It's going to be much less effective or efficient, I guess, in the long run. So any questions about these things so far? Does anybody know where I got this picture from?
I know I've seen it before.
It's like that. There's like that, there's that meme where it's like a bunch of different pictures of brains, and it's like basically the stupider of the thing that you're doing, it gets, that's
it.
Yeah, there you go. Caitlin got it. Okay, so next one. While we're on the topic of where I got pictures from, who knows where this picture's from? This is a more obscure one. Nobody. All right. So it's awesome. It's a hilarious, like, I think it's from the 90s movie called Johnny Mnemonic. That's Keanu Reeves. And he's about to like download a bunch of data into his brain. He's like a courier for data or something. I can't remember, but amazing movie. So basically all the efficient ways to use our attention span are the opposite of the things that I just said. So instead of multitasking, doing one thing at a time is much less likely to burn your brain out quickly. That goes along the same line with focus. Yeah, 90s sci-fi. It's an amazing genre. Totally recommend this movie. Speaking of focus, it's pretty hard for me to like, okay, I gotta look at the chat. Oh shit, people are still trying to join this room or whatever. But anyways, the more that you're able to focus, the less likely you are to burn your attention out, which is why a second ago I was talking about people were mentioning meditation as one of their ways to recover. Meditation not only is a good tool for recovery, but it's also a good tool for practicing the muscle of focus, because typically in meditations we have some kind of an object of focus, whether it's the breathing, whether it's like physical sensations within our body, or it could be a candle, or it could be something crazy like a mandala or whatever. But anyways, most types of meditation involve some sort of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Intentional object of focus. The next thing, so like the opposite before, I think in the last slide I was saying, relying on willpower. What I'm calling is the opposite of that is relying on automatic behavior. Which is, again, it's going to be the topic of next month's workshop. So look forward to that. But what I mean by that, oh, oops, hang on, somebody's trying to join. Can I figure out how to do this? Admit. Okay. So what I mean by automatic behavior is basically things like habits. So for example, it probably doesn't require much willpower or even much attention span for you to be able to brush your teeth. It's something that becomes automatic. So the more automatic something feels to you, the less of your attention span and also the less of your willpower that it's going to require. And those two are pretty linked. And again, the opposite of extrinsic motivation would be relying on intrinsic motivation. So the extent to which you feel like you genuinely want to do something is going to make it much easier for you to do it. So this stuff I recognize, like this stuff around how to effectively and efficiently use our attention span, this is more or less, these are probably all things that you've heard in one way or another. I hope that me discussing it here has deepened your resolve and believing in those things a little bit more. But before I move on to the next session, which is about attention restoration theory, which is a theory about how to restore attention, I just want to check in and see if anybody has any questions. We all good? Can people give me a thumbs up if they feel like they're ready to move on? All right, I got some thumbs. Excellent. I'm like so bad at doing this. All right, it's this one. Yeah. Okay. All right. So there we go. Attention restoration theory. So the main thing that I want to talk about in attention restoration theory is that there are three characteristics of activities which are considered highly restorative. In other words, when we do these types of things or when we act in this type of a way, it tends to recover our attention span more quickly than if we did the opposite. So the first thing that I want to mention is called, in the literature, it's called getting away. And I want to talk about getting away in three different ways: physically, emotionally, and mentally, from whatever it is that you're trying to recover from. So as this picture is demonstrating, getting away physically means getting away from your desk. You don't have to flip it over, but that can be fun if you're into it. But yeah, so for example, if you work at a desk, it would mean standing up and getting away from your desk. Or if you work at a construction site, it would mean going to the break room or getting away from wherever it is that you do your work. So somehow physically getting away from the environment in which you work. It could also be, if you're in a situation where you can't get away, let's say you're taking an exam and you have to be there for an hour during this part of the exam before you can go to the bathroom or whatever, you can get away. You can create that space mentally inside of your brain. So meditation is a good way to do that. You can just close your eyes for 30 seconds and try to relax and try to get away from whatever it is that you're going through in that moment. So you can get away from things mentally, you can get away from things physically, getting away from things emotionally. I guess that would be more about like changing your emotional mindset. So for example, if you are having an argument with somebody and you're feeling very frustrated and angry about that, whatever that you can do to change your mindset to feel slightly different, which usually requires some form of changing the way that you're thinking about that specific situation. So getting away from things physically, emotionally, and mentally. And just to like summarize it, it's basically you want to do the opposite of whatever you were doing that was causing your attention to be burnt out. So if you're reading and that's what's burning you out, don't like do something, don't like switch from reading one book to another book. That's probably not going to recover you very well. Or if you work on a computer and you switch from like say, for example, writing code to like checking Reddit. It's like you haven't, like very little has actually changed. You're pretty much still in the same position. You're still looking at a computer screen. So that's not going to be a very good form of getting away. So if you want to be good at getting away, you just want to find as much as possible the opposite of whatever it was that you were just doing. Are we all good there? Any questions on that piece of it? How are we doing on time? All right, I'm going to keep rolling. So the next piece is something called soft fascination. So that is being demonstrated very well here by Bill and Ted. It's basically like when you do something that makes you go, whoa, or like, huh, interesting, you know? So soft fascination, I would say, is characterized by 3 pieces. The first piece is around curiosity. That means you look at something and you're curious about it. So it could be like me like looking at this pen and being like, huh, like I wonder how the hell a ballpoint pen works, and like really just like getting curious about what's the mechanism behind this. But it's not curiosity in the sense that like I must know how this ballpoint pen works. There's much more lightness to it. So anytime that you feel a sense of heavy pressure, it's unlikely, or stress, it's unlikely that that's going to help you recover. But if it feels like this is insignificant, but it's cool, and I'm just curious about it, and I just want to check it out, then that's going to be much more likely to help you feel recovered. And the last piece about it is effortlessness, which I feel like is related to both of these really. But it's like, if I'm looking at a pen and I'm like, check it out and trying to figure out what it's really all about, it's not like I have to really exert any effort to do that. I mean, I could exert effort to do that, but if I did, then it would become less of an activity that would help me recover. It would become more of an activity that feels serious, it feels heavy, it feels forced, all those things. So soft fascination then is used to juxtapose with hard fascination. So hard fascination would be something that requires a lot of attention and a lot of intention. So an example that I think about is like if you're playing ping pong. Ping pong is like fun. There might be lightness. I don't know that I would say that it's necessarily effortless. I guess it just depends how you're playing. But if you're having an intense match, you really like got to be in the moment in order to be able to hit the ball back so that you don't get completely destroyed. Or if you're like playing music, there's some types of playing music which could be soft fascination. Like if you're just like kind of messing around with a guitar on a fretboard, or like just banging on keys randomly on a piano, or playing a song that you've played a million times and it feels like it's something that's more or less automatic to you. But if you're like playing with a group of people and you're like, oh shit, I'm performing, I gotta like make sure I get everything on time, that would be something that's more like hard fascination. So it can be super fun, but it requires a lot of effort. So it's that matter of requiring like intense effort and presence that would characterize something as hard fascination, which would mean that it's not as good of a way to recover our attention spans. Any questions about that piece of it? All right, cool. So the third one then, if I can figure this out, the third characteristic is not a surprising one, but it's about comfort. So the more comfortable the environment is that we are taking that recovery and we are trying to restore ourselves in, the more likely it is that we're going to feel recovered. And I want to talk about 3 different types of comfort. So the first is mental comfort. So this is where it starts to get maybe a little bit less intuitive, but the word coherent, you want to be in an environment where things make sense. If you're in a place where things don't really make sense to you, it's going to be hard for you to relax, and therefore it's going to be hard for you to recover. So an example of an incoherent environment would be if you are somebody who has never been to Japan before and you are suddenly find yourself in like the crossroads at Shibuya, where there's like roads going in every direction, cars going in every direction, people walking everywhere, signs everywhere, like bright lights. It's like, what the fuck is going on? That is not going to be a very good place for you to recover. But if you are in, for example, your own bedroom, that's probably going to be a place that feels very coherent to you. It's also probably going to be a place that feels very familiar to you. So familiarity and coherence kind of go hand in hand. Typically, the more familiar you are with something, the more coherent or the more understandable it's going to be to you. And also ease. If you feel like you have control over your environment and you're able to easily manipulate it in ways that make sense to you, again, this is going to be useful for your ability to recover and restore your attention. From the emotional side, it's really just a sense of safety. So if you feel stressed out for whatever reason, it's unlikely that you're going to recover your attention span very well. If you feel threatened, in that it's not like you have to be actually physically threatened by something, it's really how you're thinking about it. So if you're thinking thoughts about something which stress you out, that is unlikely to help you feel recovery. So the trick there then is to observe those thoughts as objectively as possible, as much as you are capable or willing to in that moment, and try to think about something in a different light that is not likely to make you feel unsafe. Of course, if you are actually unsafe, then definitely try to find a way to get safe, usually. Extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, I touched on that earlier, but basically if you feel like you're forced to be in a certain area, you're less likely to feel like you're able to recover there. So again, that's another trick with thinking. If you feel like you're forced to be somewhere, then you can think about what is giving me the sense that I am forced to do that, and as much as possible, try to get back a sense of agency or control or choice over the situation that you're in. The deeper that you feel a sense of choice, in the sense that this is something that I'm choosing to do versus something that I have to do, the more likely you are to, again, be able to recover and restore that attention. And then physical is obvious. It's being demonstrated very well by this beautiful doggo. Whatever will feel physically comfortable for you is also usually likely to help you recover more quickly. Any questions about comfort or about the previous two things, which were soft fascination and getting away?
So usually when we are like, let's say when we are working and then we are in a high energy state, that's when we seem to look for recovery modes, right? Like
When we're in a high energy state, we look for recovery more?
when we are spending a lot of energy on some work, let's say you're learning something new related to work, and that's when you're spending a lot of energy.
Right.
That's when we try to uh, dispense lesser energy and try to look for more relaxing things, which is this kind of soft fascinations. So I'm just curious how much of it is really related to your diet.
Related to your diet?
Yeah, like
Oh boy, that's like a whole different can of worms. But I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me is like the way that our attention span works. It tends to go in line with like there's two. I guess there's sort of two things going on. There's one, like how much of our attention span are we using? That's going to obviously make it deplete more quickly. But then there's also something called, I believe it's called ultradian rhythms, which is basically like, it's like our cycles of energy, which happen, which sort of waver throughout the day. It's the same as sleep cycles. You know, you start out in REM sleep and then you go like stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and you go way down, and this is very low energy, and these waves happen throughout your sleeping. Those waves actually continue throughout our waking lives. So those waves can be dictated very much by how we eat. So for example, if you eat a lot of sugar or like drink a lot of caffeine, it's likely to give you a spike in energy, but then you're going to spike downwards. So your like physical energy is definitely going to be correlated to your mental energy or your attention span. So if you eat more balanced diets, if you minimize your intake of simple sugars and things like caffeine or whatever, it's going to make I guess, like the peaks and the troughs are going to be less high and less low. It'll give you more balance throughout the day. Does that answer your question?
yeah, I mean, I was just curious whether it's really related to the diet at all.
I'm sure there's a correlation. I mean, your physical, like the amount which you have physical energy, I'm sure is going to be correlated to your mental energy and to your attention span. And I would imagine that eating and what you eat has a pretty heavy correlation to that. Yeah. But in terms of like, I don't know, there's all types of like nootropics and like all this, like, at least I see in my like random advertisements for like, drink this mushroom tea to like get whatever. I don't know. That stuff might be legit, but that's like outside of the scope of what I know about and what I was planning to talk about today. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Let's move on. All right. Let me move this thing. Okay, so here's the part where I want to talk about nature. So attention restoration theory came up with those three things that I mentioned earlier: getting away, soft fascination, and comfort. And standardized those and looked at them in a scientific way. Here's some of the research they found about some of the most effective ways to recover attention. And they found that any kind of engagement with nature, maybe not any kind, but most kinds of engagement with nature is going to be a highly restorative activity. So just to cite some studies, and they did some study on breast cancer patients. They found that spending time in nature was significantly linked to stress and attention recovery. So if you have breast cancer and you are dying of a serious illness, that's pretty much one of the most stressful situations that you can find yourself in. And they found that for those types of people, spending time in nature can be a significant boost to reduce stress and also improve their attention span and ability to use attention over time. Also, another study from 1991 was if you take a vacation in nature versus a vacation in an urban environment, the vacation in nature is much more likely to have you feeling recovered and restored when you go back to work. And then finally, actually the same thing applies to if you have a view of nature from your office building. If you can see trees and grass or something that feels like nature to you from your window, wherever it is that you work, you're more likely to enjoy the work that you're doing and also have less sick days. I think I didn't write that one in here, but that was, oh yeah, there's view of nature equals less sick days and job satisfaction. That's from Kaplan, 1993. Kaplan's one of the main, what's the word I'm looking for? Professors, scholars who came up with attention restoration theory.
I heard of the 91 study in school.
Hmm.
They were talking about it being bottoms up processing instead of top down processing. Where you're
Yeah,
taking
tell
in
me
an
more about
observ-
that. I seem to remember reading about that at one point, but tell me more.
So bottoms up processing is taking stimulus around you and just taking it in and sensing it with your five senses. Whereas top down processing is perceiving, putting things together in your mind, making connections, looking for patterns, being creative. And that takes more mental effort, is what I learned.
Yeah,
So when you're
yeah.
walking in nature, you're just observing mindfully.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's like that, and that sort of goes back to the idea of soft fascination that we were talking about earlier. It's you want it to be something that I like the words that Julia was using, where it's like it's not active. It's just like you're just like absorbing rather than like pushing stuff out there, which is perception, which is a much more active process. So the extent to which we're able to just receive input without necessarily feeling like we have to categorize everything or make sense of it. Again, that's going to help us recover more. And nature tends to be a really great way for doing that. Whether that's for biological reasons or whatever is up for debate. But the fact of the matter is they found that if you're trying to restore yourself, engaging with nature in one way or another is likely to be a very useful way to do that. Any more questions or other things people want to add? Cool. So I want to talk about how to engage with nature. And I think Julia gave us a really good segue for that. But there's basically an infinite ways of doing it. I've written down some possibilities here. You can just stare at it. You can spend time with animals. They are count as nature, even if they're your pets. Engaging with houseplants, whether it's watering them or pruning them or like moving them around or whatever. Gardening, hiking, foraging, exploring, dissecting. It doesn't have to be animals, but that might be fascinating. It might be a little bit weird, but I'm also talking about like, I don't know, if you see a weird like bean thing growing on a tree, like pull open that bean and be like, what's up with this bean? What's inside of this thing? Or like, I don't know, throw it on the ground and scrape it open if it feels gross and you don't want to touch it and just look at what's inside it. Whatever. Photography is also really another great way of doing that, as long as you don't get too caught up in like finding the perfect photograph, but just like the act of like, ooh, let me like get this scene, squared up just right and snap it. So those are some ways of engaging with nature, but what I'd love to hear from you all is how do you all engage with nature? And what do you find to be some nice ways to do that?
I like float trips.
Yeah, I did a bunch of floating this summer as well. I'm assuming you're talking about like floating on a river?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or if you live in a beach waiting in the ocean.
That's, yeah. What are some other people's favorite ways of engaging with nature?
I grow some vegetables, and it's a nice way for me to water them, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah, growing,
understand the
yeah,
seasons and the effects on them. The basic photosynthesis is very relatable.
right. Yeah, yeah, growing plants is a lot of fun. I mean, whether they're edible or not.
I read about a like meditation technique where it's called a sit spot, where you sit and you stare at the same spot in a like in a meadow or in a garden, and small spot, and you just observe everything that's happening. And I've done it, and it's sort of you get slowly a deeper and deeper assessment of every element to it, and it's really great.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing about nature and like anything that doesn't involve a screen is that there's an infinite amount of depth that you can look at. Like if, you know, obviously you could zoom into something. I don't know if they found the limit of like tiny particles or whatever. Obviously we can't actually see that stuff, but you know, you could do I have any like here? Do I have a plant? So here's a house plant. It's just inside of a salsa thing or whatever. But like, you know, I could look at this thing like from far away and like get the gestalt of it, or I could be like, huh, what's up? This is like a snake plant, I think. Like, what's up with I wonder what these patterns are all about. But just like, you know, really getting into it, really checking it out can be a good way to recover.
Similarly, I've done it where you kind of take the same view and look at it over time. So either through photography or like sketching, you know, you go to the same spot, you know, a couple weeks in a row or, you know, however often, and just kind of noticing how things change over the seasons, or, you know, branches falling, just like
Yeah.
random things like that. It's cool and kind of meditative to kind of go through all that.
Yeah. And I think the key to the things that I'm hearing everybody saying here is going back to what Julia was bringing up a second ago, is this idea where it's like passive. You don't feel like you actively necessarily have to do something. You're just being guided by your curiosity. Whatever like strikes you as, huh, that's interesting. Just going into it like that. And Ariane, I do the same thing. I'll do that like in the alleys, like in the alleys of Detroit, because there's always like always a lot of weird plant life going on in there to observe. Anything else anybody wants to add before we move on? All right, I'm gonna go back to the presentation.
One thing.
Yeah, please.
I was just thinking about because of when we've been in lockdown. Something that was really helpful was, without nature other than houseplants, accessible was webcams or like live streams of from the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California.
Nice.
You could just see like the sea otters or the jellyfish. And you're right, it's not 3D, but it's like a really grounding experience to do.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, so even looking at something on a computer screen can be useful. Like a lot of these studies, they would do things like show people a picture of nature on a computer screen, and then show them a picture of like an urban environment on a computer screen. And then, you know, after people would look at the pictures of the natural environment over time, compared with the people who are looking at urban environments, the people who are looking at the natural environments would recover more. Obviously, it's best if you can get into real nature, but if you can't, because there's a pandemic going on or whatever, then yeah, looking at something on a computer screen can also be at least better than looking at, I don't know, Reddit posts. Or I guess it depends on which subreddit you're in, but yeah. Cool, let me see, next one. So now I want to talk about how we can actually apply all this and put it into use. So I want to look at recovery in some very common ways that we do it. Vacation being like a longer term recovery. Let's say you take a week off, or how do you spend your weekend to recover more? How do you spend your evening to recover more? So I kind of want to I'll just like rapid fire through these, and then if people want to jump in with their thoughts of how we can apply the stuff that we just talked about, I would love to hear your ideas. But vacation, we talked about, I referenced that study earlier. If you take a vacation that is in a place that feels more like nature than an urban environment, you're more likely to feel recovered. So go to, I don't know, Yosemite instead of New York City, for example. Yosemite would be much more likely to have you feel recovered after that vacation. If it's the weekend, trying to take some time to maybe go on a hike or spend some time in your garden or just do any kind of an activity that would take several hours that you probably couldn't do during your normal work week. If it's in the evening, it could be just going on a quick walk around your neighborhood, checking out the gardens. If you are in a super urban environment, that might not be as possible, but then it could be, I don't know, going on a bike ride to a park or something along those lines. If it's a lunch break, it could just be taking 10 minutes to close your eyes and breathe and meditate. It could be like watering the houseplants in your apartment or pruning them, or if you're working from home and you have a pet, it could be spending some time with your animal. Or it can also be actually, and this is something I haven't really named, but spending time with people, assuming that it meets those things of like feeling like you're getting away, soft fascination, and what was the third one? Comfort. If a human being for you meets those three pieces, then interacting with a human can be that can humans count as nature too. So especially children usually tend to facilitate those three things. I guess it depends on your relationship to the child in that moment, but spending time with kids can be a great way to recover as well. Or maybe you just have a 15-minute break at work and you want to think about what's the best way to recover in that period. It could be all those things that I named for lunch could basically work. But even if you only have 1 minute, in 1 minute, you can recover a certain amount. There's a lot of research on like high performing athletes, like Olympic level or world-class level athletes. And what they found that what separates like the gold medalist from everybody who isn't a gold medalist is people who are able, those people are able to recover their attention span, their physical energy or whatever in a very short period. So the research that I'm thinking about is about tennis players. And they found that the tennis players who consistently are able to win championships, their heart rate would drop significantly more than the person who loses in that break. And they looked at other things in heart rate, but that's the only thing that I can remember. So even in 1 minute's time, it is possible to relax ourselves and bring our body to a place where we're much more likely to recover, even if it's a tiny amount, and that can give us an edge when we need to perform. So those are just like some random things that came to me off the top of my head, but I'm curious to hear, is there any one of these that people want to hear about in particular that we can like kind of workshop on and brainstorm about together? Or do people have other ideas that they want to add to the stuff that I just named? Well, cool. This is the last slide. I wanted to make sure that it was practical and had a bunch of stuff in there that we could use. I'll open it up for questions. Anything else that folks are curious about or want to talk about before we close it?
During the presentation, you mentioned one point about objectively looking at your thoughts. It sounds something like from mindfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, in terms of mindfulness, what it says is that the simple way is to objectify everything in your mind, and that's how your mind is trained to not associate any diversions to any curiosities. Like right now when I'm thinking, there are two layers basically. One that is thinking, then there is another one that is observing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in terms of mindfulness, like like I guess my question would be more like, how do we objectify thoughts on a constant basis? Like, is it like they suggest that you have to meditate 4 hours to really reach that place with
Could you say
when
that one more time? This is what Detroit sounds like sometimes.
yeah.
Could you repeat your question?
Yeah, I mean, on a constant basis, how do you objectify your thoughts? Like when you're sitting down there at your desk.
Yeah. So I mean, the word objectification, I want to clarify. I don't think you're talking about objectification in the sense of like objectifying people necessarily, or like in a bad sense. I think what I'm hearing you say is around the idea of like not taking things personal. So in other words, if I see, like, I could look at my coffee cup, which is empty, and I might think, fuck, I'm out of coffee. And I'm like, get angry and like make the fact that my coffee is make the fact that my cup is out of coffee like a personal problem. But if I'm objectifying it, then I'm just noticing there's a coffee cup. There's no longer any coffee within the cup. It's no longer a thing that's about me. It's just something that I'm noticing. Or another good way to think about it is like how a scientist would observe something. If a scientist is observing some sort of a chemical reaction, which involves something boiling and then, you know, it turns into vapor and then it comes back into a liquid after that somehow through some weird chemical reaction or whatever. It's not like the scientist is going to start crying when it boils and turns into vapor, and then he's going to like celebrate when it turns back into the thing. They're just observing whatever's happening. So it's as much as possible not allowing your thoughts to go into get caught up in how this is impacting you or how you think it's going to impact you, but just looking at it as a third party observer.
In a mindfulness, it'd be non-judgmentality.
Right.
So I think the word I would use.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
I wonder how the scope of this research changes in relation to ADHD.
Yeah, I'm also curious about that, and I don't know very much about non-neuronormative situations. I think in the if you go to either, I don't know if you found this on LinkedIn or Facebook, but I think I posted a thing where it's like, if you want to read more about attention restoration theory, click this. I think there was a section in there where they're like how it applies to people with ADHD. I think,
right.
I don't remember exactly what it said, but that would be a place that you could go to find and like look into, you know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Kayla.
I'm wondering about how to work elements of attention restoration into routine in ways that don't make them then routine and just easy to like breeze by.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like drinking my tea, for instance, can be, you know, comforting and like soft fascination with steam and stuff, but it can also just be an opportunity to like keep, you know, overthinking the thing I'm overthinking.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you or others have thoughts about ways you could make this into a habit.
Does anybody else want to tackle that before I start blabbering? I guess the first thing that comes up for me would be presence. Like the degree to which you're able to be present with that thing, the less likely it would become something where you're just like going through the motions. So like actually doing the thing rather than just going through the motions would probably be the first thing that comes up for me. But it also depends on what you're doing. I mean, sometimes it's okay to go through things automatically, especially if it's something that you've done a million times and you feel like it doesn't require that much attention. But if you're trying to, like, for example, creatively solve a problem, then going through the motions isn't really going to be a very effective strategy for doing that. So I would say it's the level of presence. And if you're like, you know, if you're trying to solve a problem and you are taking a break from solving that problem by drinking your tea, then I would say getting absorbed in drinking your tea would be the best thing for you to do in that moment, rather than trying to solve the problem by drinking the tea or thinking, I need to recover so that I can solve this problem. That's going to put the pressure on yourself, and it's going to take away from the emotional and mental comfort piece of it. So it's like just allowing yourself to enjoy it as much as you're capable of. Or if you're not capable of enjoying it, then it's looking at what's going on inside my emotions and getting curious about that, and allowing yourself to look at that in a way that feels impersonal or objective or non-judgmental, like Julia was saying, then will be more likely to help you recover and then get the energy or whatever it is, the inspiration that you need to figure out that problem. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Well, as I wrap up, I have one more slide that's just a sort of like administrative stuff. But like I said before, I'm a leadership coach. If you know anybody who's looking for a coach, have them shoot me an email. I'm gonna email these slides out to everybody so you don't have to write this down. But yeah, if you know anybody looking for a coach, if you know anybody looking for having a workshop facilitated, hit me up. The next workshop is going to be on November 15th, and it's about automatic behavior. So turning things into habits, making it so that you don't have to rely on willpower, which is very limited, just like attention span. The next thing I want to say is, if anybody wants to support me, I'd love to have your money, maybe not all of it, but some of it. You can support me via Patreon. You can become my patron. That's like a monthly subscription type thing. You don't really get anything for that other than feeling good about supporting something that I would imagine that if you want to support, that you can do there. If you want to do one-time donations, you can do that via Coffee or PayPal. My information is there. Like I said, I'll mail it out. And if you want to stay informed about future workshops, I'm not going to put you on a mailing list proactively. I hate when people do that. But if you want to join my mailing list, you can go to that link, type in your email, and then I'll make sure that you get informed about these things. I really only email about them about once a month. Yeah. Cool. Well, that concludes the workshop, and we were right on time. But if anybody wants to stay and chat about anything at all, or ask questions about the stuff that we were talking about, I'm happy to stick around for as long as folks want to. But if people want to go and like enjoy their Sundays, feel free to hop off.
Thanks for putting
you.
this together.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Sai, and everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Somebody was staying on, or maybe this is a question for Eric.
Sure.
Do you have any recommendations for podcasts for soft fascination? Or it might be totally dependent on one's.
I mean, it would
like,
depend on what
personal
you're
interest,
interested in, but I guess I'm not a big podcast guy. I listen to a lot of, I'm trying to learn Japanese, so I listen to a lot of podcasts in Japanese, but that's not really a recovering thing for me.
No, yeah, I've been doing that with Spanish too, and it's like, I can't understand these words, so I'm going to be annoyed about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I would say anything that's like, anything that feels like fun and goofy and like, I don't know, what's his name? Tim Heidecker from Tim and Eric has a really funny podcast that's just like totally goofy and out there. I don't know if you like Tim and Eric, maybe you would like it.
I have no idea what Tim and Eric is, but I'll look it up.
It's a real, I mean, it's a super goofy, crazy TV show from Adult Swim. But yeah, I would just say anything that doesn't feel super serious, where it's just like somebody cool talking about whatever. But I'm not a big podcast guy, so it's not. I wish I had more for you there, but it's not my favorite medium. I'm more of an audiobook guy. But audiobook, if I was going to do audiobook, then it would be like, if for fascination, then it would be anything that's fiction. Probably it would be much more likely to be, recovery based for me. But really, it's just anything that you're really interested in, and that you don't feel pressure to learn. Yeah.
Cool. I think fiction's a great idea. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for coming. Hope to see you next time. All right, Ani, Brian, thanks a lot for coming. Either of you have anything before I close this out?
No, thanks so much, dude. Great job.
Yeah, thanks a lot. See you around.